Mainstream mythology is obsessed with telling us the same old stories. Zeus is horny, Hades is evil, Medusa needs to get her head chopped off, and Oedipus wants to bang his mom. But there are a ton of other figures in the Greco-Roman mythos with stories that are almost never, if ever, referenced in pop culture. Zeus and his nigh countless side pieces are always hogging the spotlight. So today, I want to give praise to some of the more obscure gods. The ones who keep our reality from coming apart at the seams while our king is off shooting his godly goo in as many directions as possible. I think what I'm the most excited about with today's obscure gods, though, is that despite their obscurity, they are tremendously influential, and each one plays a pivotal role in a major myth you probably have already heard without you ever realizing it. Oh, and to those of you who are adventurers or are obsessed with mythology, I'm talking the real mythology buffs, you should know that we just started selling seats for our next international field trip to Greece. Specifically, we're going to Crete, and we're going to see firsthand the ancient ruins of the palace where the Minotaur was imprisoned. There's a safari with an intermission to swim in the Mediterranean Sea, and museums with ancient artifacts that you can't see anywhere else. The itinerary also includes a lot of free roam time, so we'll be hanging out and exploring Heraklion, Chania, and another city with a name I can't pronounce. On my past trips, that usually entails us all getting lunch, doing some shopping, finding a local activity like an escape room or karaoke. It's a good time. I don't know what they got on Crete, but if it's anything like all the other places in Greece that I've been, there's gonna be a lot of stray cats. So at the very least, we'll make some feline friends. If you want to join us, hit the Trova Trip link in the description or pinned comment. And remember that payment plans are available, so you can pay at your own pace. Now, if I told you there was a goddess of childbirth, you would probably think she's a total sweetheart, right? At least that's what I'd assume. I don't know if you guys heard about this, but childbirth can be a brutal and bloody affair. But if successful, the end result is the ultimate payoff, the most special and sacred reward that a person can have, a Game Boy Advance SP. With that in mind, I always had it in my mind that a goddess of childbirth's main job would be to help women through this painful and dangerous process. In fact, I kinda had that confirmed when I talked about the Egyptian goddess of childbirth and motherhood, Taweret. She watched over Egyptian women, guiding them through labor, and her hippopotamus form represented the ferocious protection that she offered the mothers and children who worshipped her. But then there's Eileithyia, the Greek goddess of childbirth and labor pains, and I want to put emphasis on that second part because she caused a lot of pain. Actually, that kinda depends on your source. If you go really far back, the poets talk about two Eileithyia, plural. One who sped labor along, and another who stretched it out. I know that talking about stretching and labor conjures up some weird mental imagery, because of all the stretching that happens. So my apologies. Anyway, as time went on, the two Eileithyia were syncretized into one Eileithyia, a name that means she who comes to aid or relieve. Not many depictions of her survived the sands of time, but she can be seen holding up a torch as a guiding light on a few vases with Athena's birth painted on them, which is kind of hilarious when you think about it. The fact that she was there mitigating Zeus's labor pains, gently coaxing Athena out of his skull until another god just walked up and blasted him in the forehead with an axe. The most ancient of writers also describe Eileithyia as a companion to the three fates, the weavers of destiny. Pausanias mentions a poet who referred to her as the clever spinner, clearly identifying her with fate, and made her older than Kronos himself. But who gave birth to the goddess of childbirth? According to Homer, the two Eileithyia were the daughters of Hera, Zeus's queen and the goddess of motherhood, who gave birth to them in a cave on Crete. Others, like Hesiod and Apollodorus, say that Zeus and Hera were her parents, so Hera seems to always be credited as her mom. She also had her own kid. There's an ancient hymn that was sung in Delos that called her the mother of Eros, the Grecian Cupid. I would say that makes perfect sense if you needed love to create a child, but unfortunately that is not the case. Though you'll probably want to know, there is a god of procreation named Genitals. Wait, that's Genitilis. And some regions syncretized Genitilis with Eileithyia, made them the same god. Aletheia had worshippers wherever humans had babies, so basically everywhere, with sanctuaries existing in Athens, Sparta, Messene, Tegea, Megara, Hermione, and plenty of other city-states, but I couldn't find any details regarding specific prayers and rituals. So unfortunately, I can't tell you what shade of rooster was sacrificed to her, but I'm gonna guess maroon. Like any Greek god, Aletheia had to be flattered by the maidens who were after her blessings, and those who did get on her good side could expect a quick and easy delivery, or as quick and easy as a delivery could possibly be. But some of you ladies watching might want to know what behaviors angered Aletheia, just to be on the safe side. Well, I can tell you that making YouTube videos that portray her in a negative light probably isn't a good start, so I'm gonna have to start planning a real nice push present for my wife if we ever have another kid. Other blasphemous behavior included chastity. So if you didn't want to get pregnant but had a happy accident, you better learn to love it, or the goddess might have some nasty accidents in store for you. But on the flip side, don't have too many babies. It's not a clown car, okay? We're not trying to find your max occupancy. Now, there are two other high-profile births that Aletheia was a major influence over. The first was the god of sunlight. When Zeus went behind Hera's back and got Leto pregnant, Hera prolonged Leto's labor by 8 whole days by distracting Aletheia, keeping her confined to her house on Olympus so she couldn't hear the cries of every other goddess who had joined Leto on the island of Delos. It actually took the messenger god Iris flying to Olympus, luring Aletheia out of Hera's house, and carrying her to Delos to set Leto free of the cursed labor pains and allow her to birth Apollo. But if that didn't sound miserable enough, you gotta hear what Hercules' mom went through. You see, Zeus deceived Princess Alcmene, his great-granddaughter, by disguising himself as her husband Amphitryon returning home from war, and got her pregnant with some of his divine DNA. Now, Alcmene was none the wiser about this, but that didn't matter to Hera, who wanted to punish Alcmene for daring to tempt her husband. When Alcmene's labor pains started, they only got worse, and for 7 straight days and nights, she endured what can only be described as agony of the purest and deepest kind. Once again, Aletheia was to blame for this. Granted, she was just following Mother's orders, but she was sitting outside of Alcmene's room through the entire ordeal, crossing her arms and legs to ensure that Zeus's new favorited child was paralyzed in purgatory. If all went to plan, Alcmene would make no progress in pushing him out, and before long, the sustained effort would kill her and the child alike. Yeah, this is the goddess of childbirth I'm talking about. Fortunately, Alcmene's assistant had a trick up her sleeve. The lowborn girl named Galinthias told Alcmene to hold her beer, sprinted out of the room, and loudly announced that the child was born and was perfectly healthy. But here's the thing. She was lying. Naturally, this news was a shock to Aletheia, who stood up from her seat in sudden disbelief. And this one lapse in focus was all Alcmene needed to be released from her hold and push out her son Hercules safe and sound. Of course, no goddess would tolerate being made such a fool of, especially not by a mortal. So as punishment, Aletheia took Galinthias by the hair, slammed her into the earth, and transformed her into a polecat, an animal that, at the time, many thought was cursed to be impregnated through their ears and give birth out of their mouths. Yeah, just when you thought mythology couldn't get weirder. Not all goddesses are so brazen about doling out misery to their worshippers though, like Asteria, the Titan goddess of falling stars and nighttime divinations like prophetic dreams and astrology. First though, I want to tell you about the god of web design, our sponsor, Squarespace. Squarespace is my go-to recommendation for anyone who needs a website because there is no other service out there that makes the process so easy. Because while Squarespace is on the cutting edge of web design, their tools aren't made with just web designers in mind. They're made for people like you and I, dum-dums. I don't think they're gonna like that I said that. For real though, no matter what you need a website for, starting a blog, sharing your music, booking appointments, or selling merch, Squarespace makes it simple. It's as easy as picking out a template from their huge library, no flex, then dragging and dropping whatever features you require or desire. And if that's still too much for you, you can give Design Intelligence a try. Their artificial intelligence can generate an entire website for you, complete with a theme and all the features you need. To try them out yourself, go to squarespace.com/Jon Solo or hit the link in the description to start a free trial. Then, when you realize you love it, use code Jon Solo at checkout to get 10% off. By the way, if you get to the end of this episode and want to learn more about rarely discussed Greek gods, you should know I have a whole other episode on the same topic, and there's some unique characters in that one that you'll appreciate learning about. Speaking of, I want to give a special thank you to commenter Cohwiltican Cat, if that is your real name, for the suggestion, because I'll admit I'd never heard of Asteria before this, but now she's one of my favorite minor gods. So Asteria is actually a goddess from the Titan generation. I've seen some confusion in my comments regarding whether or not the Titans were considered gods. They were. They were just called Titans in the same way that Zeus and his crew are called the Olympians. And Asteria's domain was a unique one. She had a special affinity for stars and the supernatural qualities of celestial beings. Planets, constellations, moons, all the typical red flags that should trigger a flight response if your date brings them up. In all seriousness though, I think that is such a cool domain, and it came with some real power. Pausanias describes a sanctuary to Asteria in Lake Daimonia. Listen, I want to pronounce these names right, but look at that. What chance do I have? Anyway, the way he describes her, she's kinda like an all-powerful search engine. He says that people consulted with an oracle in that place with questions of all kinds regarding love, wealth, weapons cheats for Grand Theft Auto, and the answers would come to them in a dream that night. We've talked about dream gods before, and how prophetic dreams flew through the gate of horn, while meaningless dreams went through the ivory gates. So I suppose Asteria had some influence over which gates those demons went through. If she didn't want you to know the truth, she'd send some nonsense through the ivory gates to distract you. Her domain also has a little bit of overlap with Hecate, the goddess of witchcraft and communions with the ghosts of the dead. But that's okay, because according to Hesiod, Hecate is Asteria's daughter by another titan named Perses. Their love story is a short and sweet one. Very short, actually. Asteria is the daughter of Coeus, the northern pillar that holds up the sky, and Phoebe, another Titan goddess who presided over bright intellect. And like 5 minutes after Asteria was born, Perses brought her over to his sweet crib and told her it could be hers if she agreed to be his wife. And Asteria, being about 6 minutes old now and never having seen a house before, was thoroughly impressed, so she agreed, and the two proceeded to make waves in the Aegean Sea. But as you know, the Titans weren't allowed to roam free for very long. After King Cronus' son Zeus tricked him into puking up his kids, a war had broken out, and after the old guard was imprisoned in Tartarus, the remaining Titans had to swear their allegiance fast. Some Titans, like the River Styx, didn't hesitate and swore allegiance to Zeus as soon as he had the upper hand, and this paid off big time. Zeus made it divine law that any oaths taken in Styx's name were sacred and sinful to break, and he gave all her kids jobs, including Kratos, the god of strength. Now, there's nothing about Asteria swearing herself to Zeus specifically, but the old poets do say that he loved her and went so far as to make a pass at her. No, Zeus made a pass at another woman? It's hard to believe, but he really did, and in response, the other woman said no. Of course, Zeus, being the king of the cosmos, meant that he was going to take what he wanted, so he made another pass at Asteria, and in response, she turned into a quail and flew away. It's hard to make a rejection much clearer than that, but it's not like Zeus cared anyway. He proceeded to take off after her in his iconic eagle form, and before long, he was closing his talons around her. But Asteria, refusing to betray the man that she loved for a man that she wanted nothing to do with, found an escape route and plunged into the sea. where she proceeded to be pursued by Poseidon. Listen, I wish I was making that up, but poor Asteria was dodging deity dick like she was the mole in Whack-A-Mole, and the hammer was... I think you could figure it out. Anyway, at that point, she had nowhere left to run. So, like many of the women that would appear in myths after her, Asteria gave up her feminine form and took on an entirely new shape, that of an island, the island of Delos. And if that sounds familiar, it's because I just talked about Delos in the last section. But now we go a layer deeper on the mythology iceberg, because Leto, Apollo's mother, was a Titan goddess, and Asteria was her sister. So that means when Leto was wandering the earth for 8 days looking for a safe spot to give birth out of Hera's gaze, it was her sister that came to her rescue. But before I get too sentimental, I should point out that none of the poets that I read noted the relation between Leto and the island. In fact, the given reason that Delos allowed Leto to give birth there was because Leto promised her son's first temple would be built on her land. Typical sisters, you always gotta get something out of it, don't ya? You can't just be nice. Regardless, I personally believe that Asteria did deserve a little something for the trouble because she was risking Hera's wrath by giving Leto shelter. There's actually a badass line from her in one of Callimachus's hymns where she basically says, "Lay it on me, Hera, your threats don't scare me. Do what you're gonna do, but I'm gonna help this girl." And to those wondering, no, Hera did not punish Delos, or Asteria, for disobeying her queen, and it was out of gratitude, because when Zeus made a pass at Asteria all those years ago, she jumped into the ocean and transformed herself to avoid being with him. Funny how Hera interprets all these people's actions as being about her. Like, I guarantee that Alcmene did not have her in mind when she was having a reunion bang with who she thought was her husband. Just like Asteria wasn't thinking of Hera when she was running away from Zeus. In any case, it paid off for Asteria, or Delos, and she went on to be considered one of ancient Greece's most sacred islands. But if you thought Hera could be vindictive and temperamental, she's got nothing on the goddess of discord and strife. Now, I'll admit, this one is a bit of a troll inclusion by me, because when I made a short about obscure Greek gods, I talked about Eris, and so many commenters were telling me how I had to put respect on her name, and that her appearance in the Sinbad movie was a major part of their childhood. But in my defense, I'd never seen the Sinbad movie until this past weekend, and I gotta tell ya, this is fucking awesome. So I didn't know about Eris until I was about a year into my Greek mythology obsession and started reading about the Trojan War. But even now, 5 years later, I'm only just coming to understand the full extent of her influence. Her mythology goes so deep, I may have to make a video dedicated to her in the future. So today, I'm just gonna give you an overview along with some of the juiciest revelations. Eris is the goddess of contention, strife, discord, and rivalry, and Aeschylus describes her as the last of the gods to close an argument. I assume because she never wants it to end. She was said to have arms made of adamantine metal that were always soaked in blood, and snakes in place of hair, just like Medusa. Her weapon of choice was the deadly lance, and she could breathe fire out of her mouth and nose, but she rarely actually had to. Most of her enemies would fall victim to the chaos that she created around her before they could even get close to her. Eris is known to walk about the earth, at first looking small and unimportant, but as she makes her way through towns and cities, the people around her become agitated, restless. They start to fight amongst one another over every little thing. A merchant and vendor bicker about pricing, a man accuses his wife of waiting until the last minute to tell him they had plans for the weekend while she swears that she brought it up at least twice before this, and a king declares war against a neighboring city-state because he misinterpreted a kind gesture as a condescending insult. As discord spreads through every land that she passes through, Eris starts to grow, and by the time war finally does break out, her head is scraping the heavens as she rejoices over the ensuing havoc and bloodshed. As you might expect, she gets along great with Ares, the god of war, and the two were known to appear on the battlefield together alongside Athena, Ares' children, Phobos and Deimos, Fear and Dread, and a few other war gods. What I think is especially cool about Ares, and pure evil, is that she not only creates the unrest and negative emotions that lead to the conflict, she can worsen the emotional and psychological toll the conflict takes on you. Homer described her as hurling down bitterness equally on both sides of the battlefield to make the men's pain heavier. And while we're on the subject, I've got another fun wrinkle to add to the Greek mythos. It's actually Ares' fault that mankind endures pain at all. Mainstream mythology would tell you it was Pandora's fault, and I'm guilty of it too. But she was a scapegoat, because you know all those bad vibes that Pandora let out of the jar? Those were Ares' kids. Toil, forgetfulness, starvation, pain, fights, battles, murders, manslaughters, arguments, lies, broken laws, and vandalism. Then there's Oath, who brings misery to anyone who breaks a vow. A bunch of little shits if you ask me. That's the obnoxious family that ruins everybody else's time at the Pizza Hut. Now, while Ares is technically responsible for just about every minor disagreement that took place in the ancient Greek world, the most famous conflict that she caused had to be the Trojan War. But John, I thought the Trojan War happened after Orlando Bloom kidnapped that sexy queen. Well, that's absolutely right. Don't look it up. But there's more to the story than that. The true start to the Trojan War was when Zeus decided that there were too many humans, and it was taking a painful toll on Gaia, the personification of the earth, and his dear sweet grandma. Not to mention, all this co-mingling between the gods and mortals led to too many heroic demigods being born, and they were starting to be worshipped as much as the Olympians themselves. So Zeus needed a conflict that would take out the world's mightiest heroes, and a considerable amount of cannon fodder, and decided that Peleus and Thetis' wedding would be the perfect staging ground. That poor couple had no idea what they were agreeing to when Zeus offered to send the invites out himself, but how could they say no to the king of the cosmos? But here's where his evil scheme starts to unfold. He invited all the gods, every single one, except for Ares. A decision that I thought was reasonable when I first talked about this story. To me, it made sense to not want a goddess who causes fights at your wedding, but that obviously wasn't the real reason. Because when Ares found out about her exclusion, she was enraged, to the point where she actually fantasized about releasing the Titans from Tartarus so they could destroy the Olympians and tear Zeus limb from limb. She realized that was a little too aggressive though, and settled on something less obvious. On the day of the wedding, she took one of the prized golden apples of the Hesperides and tossed it into the banquet hall, proclaiming that it was a gift for the fairest goddess. Then she flew away and left the party with 3 temperamental goddesses who needed validation fast: Aphrodite, Athena, and of course, Hera. Now, while Zeus expected Ares to do something disruptive, he didn't anticipate this specific move, and knew he had to play it smart, so all the goddesses didn't pin this on him. So, like a true Aikido master, he redirected their energy and said, "Why don't you let that pretty boy Prince decide?" Lucky for Prince Paris though, the contest soon evolved from who's the hottest to what kind of bribe do you want. Athena offered him a glorious military career where he conquered every land he set his sights on. Hera said she'd make him a great king with access to the world's finest foods, wines, and women at any moment, but it was Aphrodite who won him out in the end. She told Paris that she would arrange a marriage between him and the most sought-after skirt in all of Greece, a really hot lady named Helen. But what Aphrodite failed to mention was that Helen was already married to a Spartan king, and if Paris pursued her love, then that king would fuck his day up royally. But in the end, based on what head we know Paris uses to think, that may not have made a difference anyway.